I was threatening to start singing if people didn't come into the room. I was told that might drive people out of the room, so I'm going to control myself. So I'm starting the workshop. My name's Izzy Martin. I'm the CEO of the Sierra Fund. This is the last workshop of the conference. After this workshop, we will have a reception that begins immediately after we're done. There's appetizers and a no-host bar. They are already getting the appetizers ready next door, so it will begin. We have an award ceremony at 6 o'clock. We'll be giving the student poster people an award. The top winner gets $250, which is big money to a graduate student or a college student, and $100 and then $50. We're also giving out leadership awards to an individual, an organization, and a state agency or a government agency. And we'd love to have you fill out the evaluation forms. And as much as I'd love to have you say it's all perfect, it'd be better if you told us how to make it better. It's always, no matter how good you are, no matter how brilliant and perfect this was, you can always make it better. So please help us make it better. So starting, this synthesis panel is designed to bring together the 4 tracks of our conference and reflect on what happened at the workshops today. We did something I've never really tried before. We had the same facilitator run a workshop all day long so that that person had a sense of how to tie the workshops together and tie them back to our policy papers, which we created so that there's living documents that come out of this conference that we then will be implementing for the next several years. This is how Sierra Fund has done our work for many years. We started off in 2006 pulling a group of people together, thinking with each other, writing a report, spending 2 years editing and rewriting it, and then we released it in 2008. That was called Mining's Toxic Legacy, and it laid out our action agenda for the last 7 years. This conference, we're hoping, will help us do that same sort of pulling together the best thinking that's available right now, the biggest questions that people want answered, and turn those into papers. Now, we do know that you couldn't be at all of the workshops, and so we thought it would be helpful to then have people who were listening and thinking about this, who would come and tell you what they heard over the course of the day at their panel. So we had a panel about how to prioritize mine reclamation. We had a panel about best available mining technologies. We had a panel about incentivizing mine reclamation and a panel about articulating the multiple benefits of gold mining. So now that Dr. Monahan has come in and given the secret note to Stephen, who is our first synthesis panel member, Dr. McCord has been facilitating the prioritization track all day. He's the president of McCord Environmental. He holds a BS in Civil Engineering from Clemson and an MS and PhD from UC Davis. He's got, yay, Aggie! Yeah. I'm an Aggie. He has over 20 years of consulting, research, and teaching experience in the environmental engineering field. He's a registered professional engineer in the state of California. A particular area of focus, his focus has been mercury. Stephen is absolutely vital to the Sierra Fund intellectual process. He's somebody that we rely on to help us review our papers, helps us think about how to facilitate big conferences like this. He's an amazing, amazing leader, and I'm really, really proud to introduce you, Stephen.
Thanks, Izzy. So just go for half an hour?
Yeah, I think probably about 10 minutes would be really,
Tops.
Really welcome.
Yeah.
You can take one.
Yeah, take it. No, really, I'll just keep it brief, and we can all talk about the whole thing later. So the session, the track that I was, is there anything up there? Okay, the track was on prioritization of mine sites. The speakers in the presentations, their presentations were a little bit broader than that. Yeah, thanks. Turn that one off or something.
If you do it down like that, it doesn't do the feedback quite so bad. There.
All right. It was a little broader than just prioritizing abandoned mine sites. We also had a talk on modeling in the numerical modeling of mercury in the delta. So it's taking the water and the loads of mercury from the watersheds of the delta through the delta. Let me step back. And then a couple efforts were on prioritizing in different ways. So there's, well, 3 of them really. So a USGS presentation was on collecting data from, particularly in the Sierra, and looking at correlations with numerous, 30-something different possible correlates, possible reasons why the mercury in streams in the Sierras, in the fish in the streams in the Sierras were higher or lower. And they got pretty good information out of it. You can explain 60-something% of it, of the variability in fish tissue mercury levels in the streams and Sierras by this model. And all of that was just GIS-based data. So, we can make good inferences from the information that we have spatially on levels of mercury in the fish. Also talk from Glenda Marsh with the Department of Conservation on how the department and its sort of partners and other agencies that are working on abandoned mine lands are prioritizing. So they're working on a system, first of all, to assess in a more consistent way, so that the information that goes into these sort of common databases can be used in a consistent way to prioritize. And there's a lot of discussion about how to prioritize and what the value of that is. One thing that came up, maybe even in Izzy's talk this morning, was 47,000 mines in California, but those aren't all the same. Not all mines are created the same, right? Some are just little holes in the ground, and some are Malakoff diggings, right, that make posters. And just understanding where the sort of the line is and what's important and what isn't. There's something like 10% of those are worth doing more about. So under 5,000 now from the 47,000, and about half of those perhaps have been assessed. So we have now we're talking half the mines we have some assessment information of rather than 5% of them. So there's good information on that, and it's getting better. And then another talk at Alex Keeble-Toll gave a talk on some of the research she's been doing with prioritizing at a local scale. So a lot in California is, someone from John Hillenbrand from EPA pointed out, in California is unique in that the administration of mining and dealing with abandoned mine lands and modern mining is done at the local county level. So decisions are often made at that scale. There's pros and cons to it, right? So the pro is local folks, it's the local knowledge, it's local land use planning, they're the ones. However, you get inconsistency in application of federal law and sort of understanding of what ought to happen. So it's understanding that balance and doing something that's appropriate at the county scale. And there are tools of ways of prioritizing. There's existing information, as Alex was pointing out. There is enough information to make decisions and prioritize the local scale. If there's some money and some interest, we can figure out based on GIS data and other land use data and water data where to prioritize your efforts. So that was a good message to hear. The last part, and this maybe segue to you, we combined with the other technical session and had a discussion for the last hour and a half just before the break. And one of the ways that we focused, so all the speakers had some time to sort of give a recap, and I tried to convey some of that just now. Another thing that we did, I think everybody saw in their packet, even if you weren't in those sessions, this little worksheet that I had made up, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we spent a half hour, 45 minutes or so in the last session, the discussion time, to talk through those. So I won't recap them, but just recognize we got a lot of good input. People put up sticky notes and handed in these. And we got a good sense. The purpose of it was to say, well, okay, here's our mission. Reclaim California's abandoned mine lands efficiently and effectively. That's the mission, right? We all have that consistent. Everybody wants that to be done efficiently and effectively. And there's various topics with prioritization, the techniques or technologies, tracking it, like seeing if we're having some benefit, the regulations and making sure people who shouldn't be liable or necessarily aren't, and then, of course, funding. And there's other topics, but we worked with that framework of that's the consistent mission. Here are the various topics: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I won't go through them now again, but we'll synthesize those, and those will show up in the issue paper that comes out of this, or at least the notes. So thanks. Anything else?
All right, Stephen, thank you very much. Yes, and again, I love that you guys, the scientists, of course, did their homework, and they're going to give us a report afterwards. I'm really glad that SWAT thing is a fabulous tool. Our next panelist is Kendra Zamzow. What a great name. PhD, she's an environmental geochemist and the Alaska representative for the Center for Science in Public Participation. She has a PhD in environmental chemistry from the University of Nevada in Reno. In 2012, she accepted a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship through the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, and spent 16 months in Washington, D.C. offices of the EPA's Office of Research and Development / Office of Science Policy. She's currently from Chickaloon, Alaska, another great name, Zamzow from Chickaloon, providing technical analysis of mining projects on behalf of communities and tribes on topics that include copper heap leach closure, arsenic chemistry and tailings, mercury release from thermal processing of gold, and potential for acid drainage. Kendra's another person who's been deeply involved in our program for years. She's actually sat at staff meetings with the Sierra Fund who try to help us work through what it is we're doing. She reads our work, she asks us critical questions, and she's fundamentally important to the work that we've been doing. So Kendra, thank you so much.
Sure, I'm happy to do it. I have many wonderful volunteer opportunities I find myself in. We were looking at best technologies, and part of that was considering thinking about where you apply best technologies, and that can really go the entire spectrum from upstream to downstream, from site assessment to cleanup to evaluation. We had 4 speakers. The first 2 were USGS researchers. One talked about technology she was using and developing to look at arsenic speciation, which really informs how bioavailable the material is likely to be, and then that tells you something about the risk and whether that should be a priority. That was Andrea Foster. Jacob Fleck talked about, we've already got methylmercury in the wetlands, and so he was developing a technology, testing different materials that would flock the material out and take it down to the bottom and remove it from the water column, and how well would that work, and what could the impacts be of doing that technology. Then we had Michelle Wood, who was discussing, again, we have mercury already in reservoirs, so are there technologies we can use to reduce the mercury in the fish in those reservoirs? And they were looking at oxygenating reservoirs, adding nitrate, managing the fisheries in different ways. And then lastly, we had Dave Chambers from my organization, CSP2, talking about international standards for reclamation. And these are, this is a global group that includes mining companies and different stakeholders, labor unions, tribal groups, community groups, and so forth. And there is a draft standard that's out for comment, and they're working through that. And that's something that is really kind of exciting that might have applications even here. So I guess part of, I'm listening to my session, but I'm also hearing a lot from the prioritization session. I'm listening to the plenary session. So what I'm going to talk about here for the next couple of minutes kind of mixes all that together. But the first thing I guess I got out of it is these really small towns up here, which I love. I'm a small town person. Small towns are really driving big ideas. We started with Andrea Foster using massively big equipment, synchrotrons that you have to slot your time into to run your samples to get the speciation of arsenic on solids. And she realized, that now she's trying to develop techniques that don't require such big equipment and can get similar information that's useful. But then we have these wetland-wide technologies of pulling the methylmercury out of the wetlands. We have these lake-wide technologies of using oxygen or nitrate to reduce methylmercury in the food web. So, they're really taking these small town problems, have had these really big, potentially very far-reaching effects. They include the Sacramento Delta and can really be applied in a lot of places. One of the things I think that we never really got to that we need to consider is how do we evaluate these technologies as we determine how and where to apply them. So that's something that I think really needs some thought. I think we are learning these really are global issues. We're dealing with them here, but a lot of places are dealing with them. And I think we're learning from other places. I think what's being developed here will also be applied in other places beyond California. I think we're learning things about, and this goes a little bit beyond technology, but maybe not a lot, about cost benefit, about how to get an accurate financial assurance, about how to accurately evaluate what the benefits, how that's being applied into the cost benefit analysis, like pulling $1 million of gold out of a $9 million treatment system at Combi. What are some of these things worth, and use that partly as a metric to see, have you done what you said you would do, but partly also to really see what the cost is in the long term, not just the initial cost of putting in the treatment. I think we have some great technologies for visualization. We heard from Charlie Alpers about the LiDAR systems that are being used to look at erosion at Malakoff. We have great tools for assessment. Stephen just talked about the GIS database that Charlie Alpers has developed to look at predicting fish mercury from different variables, including hydraulic mine sites. We have really good characterization tools. Carrie has done great work looking at this sediment-driven system at Malakoff, and those are really good tools that we need, so we're not wasting money trying to clean up things in a way that's not going to be effective, and we're really applying the money in the right way. There are big problems that still remain. And we still need technologies. We still need to keep developing technologies. We have problems, and some of them are ones that California is going to be responsible for, where there's perpetual water treatment. That is a really big cost. That drives your reclamation cost, it drives it up quite a bit. Another thing I think we need to think about, it's local input. And the small communities, also the tribal communities, and what is it that they want? So we have these statewide water quality standards or sediment standards, we have federal standards. We may not have the money to get to those standards. We don't have the money to do that for every site. So to some extent, I think we should listen to local communities and say, what is good enough? And maybe you're not going to meet the water quality standards, but if you get it 90% better, is that good enough? What is it that you wanted to use that area for? So that's kind of, technology feeds into policy, feeds into regulatory frameworks. They kind of all feed together all the time, and they're all discussions that need to be continued. I think I just kind of wanted to end with that this is all iterative, it's all changing, it's all a moving target. Technology is changing, regulatory systems are changing, local needs and local communities are changing. Obviously, they're growing up right on top of the tailings piles. So, we just have to really be aware of using science to inform policy and also using these models that are being developed and finding where the data gaps are, using technology to fill those, and then just keep layering it on until we're getting better and we really understand what needs to be cleaned up and the best way to do that.
All right. Thank you, Kendra. I wish I could have been at all 6 of those workshops, all 6 of those workshops. Okay, Adrian Albert, our next speaker, if you speak too closely to it, then it does that feedback thing. She is the Union of Concerned Scientists California and Western States Director based in Berkeley, California. She's leading UCS's, Union of Concerned Scientists, effort to ensure robust implementation of the Global Warming Solutions Act, California's landmark climate law known as AB 32. Prior, Ms. Albert was the Environmental Policy Director for California State Senator Fran Pavley and served as lead staff on AB 32. She was passing that when I was in the building, and she was really the one running around the building trying to create the coalition that passed 32 with all of the technical pieces that took. She worked extensively in climate, energy, fuels, waste, and agricultural policy and has deep experience in translating scientific and technical work into policy ideas and creating strategic partnerships to achieve those policies. Prior, Ms. Albert served as a gubernatorial appointee directing state pesticide legislation and regulations, and previously as policy director for the Community Alliance for Family Farmers, which is an organization that I was the first director of a million years ago. Adrian is, again, a brilliant thinker, an amazing, has an amazing ability to take complex ideas and really boil them down into something important, and even more important than that, she's on the board of directors of the Sierra Fund and is my boss. Adrian.
Well, with that very generous introduction, Izzy, thank you. It's really interesting to be here looking at a problem that is kind of far away from what I usually do. As Izzy said, I mostly focus on climate and energy. But the issues in the Sierra, the mining issues in the Sierra, are probably more complex in many ways in terms of what the solution sets are than some of the things we need to do for climate change. And it's, even though we think of this as sort of a geographically constrained problem in terms of we're looking at basically the Sierra and a few other parts of the state, the eastern side of the valley and so on. This is really a global problem, as Kendra said, and I think it's something that you are kind of in the vanguard of people who are really going to need to take this problem and make it big. I learned a lot today. I've been following this issue for some time as being part of the board, and also when I was working in the legislature. This was a very interesting and fascinating issue. I think there's a lot of tendency to talk about the problems with money, and they are profound. I won't deny that. We certainly ran into that in the first breakout session, which was about challenges and opportunities, and we had wonderful representation from the Department of Conservation, Glenda Marsh, who runs the Abandoned Mine Lands Program, and then we heard from Julie Griffiths-Flatter from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy Grant Program, and we ended with Bob Schneider of Tuliome, who talked about a project that he's doing that's very promising. And I think what was interesting in listening to them all was, in addition to the problems with funding, which are unique to California, some of the other problems have to do with the way we do or don't manage our regulation. The challenges are so huge. And I think the thing that is most important is for people to identify these projects and really be ready to do something with them, because pots of money come and go in California for various things. And if you know you've got a problem, the time to start thinking about it is not when there's money available to fix it. You've really got to be prepared when we get money from bonds or from grant programs or whatever. You need to know what you need to do to start cleaning up your area. That was probably the number one, I don't know if that was a challenge or opportunity, but that was certainly a lesson from that panel. I was interested that there was a real focus that Bob Schneider from Tuliome made on time. These problems are very time consumptive. There are several stages to fixing an abandoned mine, and they all need separate attention, and to some degree they usually get separate pots of money just because of the nature of them. And I think that that's something that we need to help educate policymakers and decision makers about, that this is a problem that we are going to have for quite some time, and people need to think of it that way. I think that led in very well to the next panel, which was about mine permitting and reclamation issues, and that the SMARA, the law that governs California. We've got a very interesting introductory lesson in that by Pat Perez, who runs that program for the Department of Conservation. And he described the process for mine permitting, acknowledging that there is a tremendous gap in the capacity of local lead agencies to really manage these permitting processes adequately. Some counties, as we know, are richer than others, some are bigger than others, and some have more capacity than others. And there is a real need to getting licensed professionals to really review the permits, and people who are able to actually make professional judgments about some of the conditions under which we grant these permits. That's something that would probably require money and other things, but I think it's a really important point, speaking for a science organization. But there are also problems that the department has getting reports on time. There are many problems with the plans, and one of the bigger problems, of course, is financial assurances for liabilities and closure and so on. So Gary Parsons followed with a very personal story about what that can mean, the problems with enforcing SMARA or how adequate the law is itself in terms of his community in San Juan Ridge. And even though that was a very difficult story in terms of how hard it is for the community members, how hard they have to fight, it was also a very inspiring story in terms of the power of communities to really come together and use science, as he said. He talked about how they're not, science is their tool. And I thought that was also a really important point, that we as citizens have a responsibility to really understand what's going on in our communities and be involved. And that's not an easy thing for people, but for this problem in particular, it's something that I think can't be overlooked. And then finally, Bill Craven from the State Senate talked about current legislative efforts to reform SMARA. They tried last year with a bill called SB 1270, and when that didn't pass, they created a working group. The Sierra Fund is very involved in that, and they're working on issues. Now the bill is SB 2091.
No, 209.
209, sorry. I had a diacritical there that became a 1, sorry. So it's SB 209, just to be clear, Senator Pavley. So finally, we talked specifically about money in terms of the water bond that was passed last year. It's $7.2 billion, and there was a discussion of whether and how that money might be used to help with cleaning up watersheds in the Sierra. I think what we learned is that there are possibilities, but that money is for water. And the way that this would work for the remediation problems in the Sierra is to create projects that solve multiple problems, that are consistent with the program requirements of the bond, and that really help with the water priorities in the bond. And the 3 areas that were highlighted as possibilities, where people might think about studying the bond and see where they might strategize to do some projects: water quality and safe drinking water provisions, integrated regional water management provisions, and possibly storage provisions. I think there's already been conversation about sediment removal. So you need to have multiple benefits. You also need to collaborate like crazy. The more people's problems you solve, the better off you'll be. And I think that's, to me, moving into sort of, going from these panels to what I really feel like was the lesson of the day from these panels. This is a very big problem, and so the people who are trying to solve it need to think very big indeed. You need to think big about who you're going to be talking to, about how much money you want, about the programs you need, about the laws you're going to change, and you need to work with others to help make this happen. Cities, the state, federal government, environmentalists, water managers, miners, you could come up with a whole long list. Health professionals, I think, are very important. And I think because it's such a big problem and you need a big vision, you also need prioritization and figure out what are the problems you need to solve first. SMARA might be the best start. You need to insist on much better data. The lack of data is kind of horrifying. I think most people here understand that, and that's something that I think needs to be addressed. And that might seem a little bit overwhelming, but I've watched this process unfold for the last, 4 years or so. And I would just end by saying you've made enormous progress in terms of getting people's attention. When the conversation started a few years ago that I was aware of, the idea of reforming SMARA was kind of a distant dream, and we're actually seriously discussing that. I see public officials more and more engaged in this, and I think you've got real momentum. There have been changes at agencies. This is a really good time to get ahead of steam and keep moving.
All right. Our last synthesis speaker is John Regan. He's a founding member of the Sierra Fund's Board of Directors, my boss, president of Smart Campaigns, a national firm specializing in due diligence, strategic research, issues analysis, and media relations. His clients have included more than 30 current and former members of Congress and more than a dozen U.S. senators, as well as state constitutional officers, political party organizations, and the campaign of Izzy Martin. Oh, wait.
That should have come first.
That's right, the most important thing. And of course, he didn't make it on. Got some flowers, though. John has managed lobbying, public relations, and legislative campaigns for community-based environmental organizations, including the South Yuba River Citizens League historic campaign that won the California State Wild and Scenic River Protection for the South Yuba River in 1999. He's coordinated environmental representation on several ambitious collaborative efforts to restore endangered salmon and steelhead populations in the Upper Yuba River watershed. John, again, was one of the smart people that decided we needed a Sierra Fund. He is the only member of the board that has been on the board throughout the history of the organization. He has led us in many ways to where we are right now. I gave him a very difficult synthesis job because I know he's really capable of pulling together rabbits out of his hats and oranges juggling. Around the issue of the multiple benefits of reclamation, and then diving deep into the question of, is there a gold product that could be made available through this reclamation project? So what do you have to tell us, John Regan?
Well, this is great. I'm here with a PhD and a PhD and a director from the Union of Concerned Scientists and ISI. And I guess someone has to be the least informed person on every panel. That's me tonight. I'm going to do my best to capture some of the discussions at the various panels I attended today. If I get it wrong, if there are some shortcomings, the failures are mine and not the participants. And by the way, on behalf of the board of directors and myself personally, thank you all for attending and contributing and helping Sierra Fund in the last few years and in the future. We wouldn't have this event without all of you and our sponsors, so thank you. We started off with a conversation about the multiple benefits of sediment removal from reservoirs. And the first acknowledgement is that this is the problem of mercury contamination and sedimentation in reservoirs is ubiquitous. It's happening everywhere. Sediment, basically reduces the useful life of reservoirs. It impacts all of the benefits we would expect to get from reservoirs: water supply, flood control, hydro generation, navigation, recreation, environmental benefits. But that means that the benefits of addressing mercury contamination and sedimentation, the benefits are also ubiquitous. The potential benefits are also ubiquitous and widespread. Add to all that those things I just listed: water supply, flood control, hydro, navigability, recreation, environmental values, the value of marketable, useful materials like metals and aggregate. It can be, it was acknowledged that it can be difficult in quantifying some of these benefits. How do you put a price tag on the value of mercury removal for downstream communities? It's also difficult calculating the cost of doing nothing, because as we know, the problem as it exists today and the problem getting worse in the future does exact a cost on our state. So there was sort of an acknowledgement that, how do you price out the cost of building a new reservoir or new storage versus the cost of clearing a reservoir that's already full of sediment. And in one panel that we saw, there was this shockingly high cost of essentially creating storage or reclaiming storage from a reservoir that is already full of sediment. And folks, immediately popped up and thought, well, how are we doing including all of the costs of building the new storage facility, and how do you find it, how do you locate new facilities so they can actually serve communities, and then how do you calculate all of the benefits of clearing a reservoir that's already full of sediment? So as Adrian said, more better information about those kinds of calculations. I'm sorry about this. I can hear that feedback, so I know you can. Sediment has to be tackled at a basin-wide level, not just one reservoir at a time, and higher up in the watershed is better than lower down. So going higher up, addressing the problem there is more effective. And statewide DWR, the representative of DWR, mentioned the 3 R's of sediment management, and it's reduce the amount of sediment flowing in, rerouting sediment where possible, and then removing it. And I like this is sort of the new 3 R's instead of reduce, reuse, recycle, right? These are all variations on that. Of course, we all know we need money to do it. And sediment management has to be tied to new projects, or knit into the watershed story, is how one participant put it. Now, each reservoir, each mine, each site is going to be different. There are going to be different costs, benefits, opportunities, challenges. But there are also better opportunities in some places. And in some places, the opportunities and the benefits coming out the back end will be significant. NID's work is really interesting. The Nevada Irrigation District right now, for those who saw their presentation, it was really something. They're working to develop a portfolio of methods that are replicable and scalable to remove mercury, to remove sediment from reservoirs, and that can be used in a variety of settings, wet, semi-wet, dry. And it occurred to me that not only are the methods replicable, but so are the partnerships. And this is a real opportunity, bringing in government agencies, local communities, businesses. We've got to bring business along, NGOs, and tribes and First Nations. So that was the reservoir removal, the sediment removal portion. The next 2 panels I attended concern the creation of E3 Gold. I'm going to lump those discussions together. This was really fascinating. We had some great representation from folks who have been working with ethically produced gold, fair trade gold, jewelers, folks who've been in the fair trade business, and representatives of nations. And there were one essential question that kicked it off right away. In trying to develop E3 Gold, are we actually talking about establishing standards to define what is E3 Gold? That is it going to be a complicated compliance legal structure with lots of reporting and oversight and that sort of thing? Or are we actually talking about doing an origin of denomination label, which most participants preferred? That you can back that up with standards, but what you really need is something that doesn't throw you into the deep hole of regulation, legislation, really complicated technical compliance standards. Instead, it's an origin of denomination label. The buyer knows a positive legacy of the gold, and the money raised should go back into the system. That is, there should be some benefit to affected communities. It's simpler, but you still need stuff like some way of tracing the gold, certifying the chain of ownership. It's not been done before. Folks were very excited about it, but they acknowledged it's not been done before. But this here is a real opportunity to rewrite the future in the very thing that has destroyed so much in this state. And that's really empowering. Really acknowledge that one of the challenging things here is that from the very beginning, people most affected by the gold rush have to be part of the process from the very beginning. And we have to be ready for some strong reactions. One participant called it, it's coyote piss gold, no offense. But to some folks, the term gold rush is going to be a real ick. So there's a challenge there. How do you bring people into the community, into the dialogue, and into the process from the very beginning, and acknowledging sensitivities and the fact that some folks aren't going to want to be there, but they're going to want and they deserve an influence on the process. Again, one of the notions is that we have to find a way of putting some benefit back into the communities most affected. Lots of ways to do that. And then last but not least, I guess, the consensus was E3 Gold is not a great name, But look, there's people who do that sort of thing, marketing studies, rollout strategy. There are folks who know how to do that sort of thing. So bring them into the process. And it was really interesting. There was a lot of enthusiasm for this. This is what I also got from these panels, is the idea of attaching people's consumption and their behaviors as consumers to a larger sense, to want to be better citizens of the world and to make things better, not just in their own backyard, but also around the world, E3 Gold can do that. It can really provide a great model for doing it here and elsewhere. So, do it, but do more work on it.
Oh.
Yeah. Get back to work.
Yeah.
I think that was it from mine.
The fairly hard-ass bosses that I have are always, but that's good, which is why it's so extraordinary to work with such an amazing board. Gary Parsons this morning opening up our whole conversation using words like willow-secured riverbanks. I loved it when he said that term. We had Allison Harvey, our board member that was leading riverboats yesterday. The Sierra Fund is really, really proud to have had you come and spend your valuable time. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, I used to calculate how much money was being spent at any meeting I was at. So if I'm at a meeting and I've got the district attorney and the county CEO, and I was sort of calculating how much money. That was $1,000 an hour meeting. So this is I can't imagine. There's a couple hundred people here. This is $1 million meeting that you guys have given us at your time. Well, that's probably wrong. It's probably a couple $100,000. I'll figure that out and put it in the paper. Because I really, as I said last night, I think we are wired to work with each other as human beings. We are, especially if you can get the different kind of relationships around a table where one's a doctor and one's a lawyer and one's a plumber, and somebody is a really good carpenter and somebody's a really good fisherman. Those people all bring huge value to the conversation, and it's that respectful dialogue that we are interested in continuing to inspire as part of talking about mining. I think it's particularly important, the respect piece, because what happened here 150, 160 years ago was not respectful by any means. It was just terrible. The murder, the disease, the slavery, the disenfranchisement, it's happening right now all over the world. We haven't really ever acknowledged that it happened here. There's a lot of work to do to get the tribal people to want to work, even to talk with those of us that are the European contact folk. And I think that's appropriate. We need to earn their trust, and we've got 100 years of mistakes that we have to get over, so we have to be patient in building that relationship. Equally true, the relationship with the mining industry. For the miners that are environmentalists, that are interested in doing this right, they've also had a lot of years of some sort of strong language by, let's say, the environmental community. That we have to, they know more about mining than we do. They know more about how to remove sediment out of the reservoir than the water managers do, by a long shot. And if we want them to share their minds with us, we're going to have to acknowledge and respect their experience. I wanted just to do as my final synthesis, for those of you who weren't here last night and watched a really very silly, but very fun, I think, panel of the big picture. Today we spent most of the day in the weeds, drilling way down into the weeds and really talking in some pretty specific language about what we were doing. Last night, though, we opened up with a really big vision panel, and at the end of that panel, we had the international gold jeweler, gold and jewelry activist Greg Valerio. We had Marie Berry, who had worked with the Washoe tribe, is a California Native Indian herself, and is a scientist working on Superfund site cleanup. We had a member of the State Water Resources Control Board, Fran Spivey Weber. We had the director of the Department of Conservation, Mark Nekadam. And at the end of them making their comments to us, I invited them to imagine if they had a magic wand, except I changed it for Marie to a magic pinion pine needle. What would they do if they could do one thing to help us approach this problem? And Mark Nekadam went first, and he basically said, we need more data. The scientists all, oh yeah, he's got a PhD. And he's right, we need more data. Greg Valerio said, we need to behave with integrity. We need to bring integrity into this issue. Fran Spivey Weber said, we need to get started. And Marie said, we need to think like fish. We need to think about the fish. And I think that's as good of a synthesis of what we need to do next as I've ever heard. So I want to thank you all for coming. helping us think about this. Know that we're going to continue to victimize you. We're going to send you our papers again. We're going to expect you to read through them. Department of Conservation staff have been so amazing in helping us go through it. And Kendra and Stephen and so many of you, Mark Choi, that just really did spend hours and hours reading our papers, sending their ideas back to us incorporating them, sending them back to you. Julie Griffith-Flatter at the Conservancy. There's so many of you that are helping us think. This process is not ending, although thank heavens, all the workshops are over. And now what we get to do is go party and give people awards. I would like to remind you to please return your name badges, because we borrowed these from another organization, and evaluation forms to the front registration table. And please join us at the reception next door. Thank you, you guys.